History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to this 537th episode of the History Goes Bump podcast, Ghost Tours for the Theater of the Mind. I'm your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going to be hitting a place called the Old Slater Mill. This was suggested by our listener, Laura Frye. And as I was looking into that, I was like, are there some other places in this Blackstone River Valley that have some hauntings going on? And I found this place called Tavern on the Main that we're also going to include in this one.
Excellent.
These are locations in Rhode Island. Before we get into that, we want to welcome into the Spooktacular crew, Joe, Michelle with one L, Michael, Rhonda, Lydia, Adrian, and Rebecca.
Thank you so much for joining our Spooktacular crew.
And now, this moment in Oddity.
In the cloud forests of northern Peru, over 1,000 years ago, the Chachapoya people existed. Known as the Warriors of the Clouds, the hilltop ruins of Kulap have been said to rival those of Machu Picchu. Much of the information we have on the Chachapoyan society has been gleaned from archaeological remains located at their funerary sites. In 1997, a Chachapoyan necropolis located on limestone cliffs overlooking Laguna de los Condores was discovered. This location was actually overtaken by the Incas when they conquered the Chachapoyan people. There are mausoleum-type houses that were built into the rock face, sarcophagi with human faces, and all seem to exude the strong independent culture of the people. According to bioanthropologist Dr. Sonia Gillen, these mummies are very significant because they are the first to show us how the Incas prepared their dead in the royal way. They cured the skin to preserve it and made it into leather, and they extracted the organs through the anus. Well, their bodies were wrapped in cloths and surrounded with artifacts and offerings. According to Dr. Gillen, the Inca revered their royal dead because they were still very much part of the world of the living, and the royal mummies participated in meetings and still held property and made decisions. Keeping the royals around for meetings and such after death as mummies certainly is odd.
Turn out the lights. The party's just getting started.
And now, this month in history.
In the month of May, on the 17th in 1749, Dr. Edward Jenner was born in Berkeley, Gloucestershire. At the age of 5, little Edward was orphaned and went to live with his older brother. From a young age, Jenner was obsessed with science and nature. By the age of 13, he apprenticed with a country surgeon and began his journey into the medical field. According to historical records, it was at this first apprenticeship that he heard a dairymaid remark, "I shall never have smallpox, for I have had cowpox. I shall never have an ugly pockmarked face." In 1764, Jenner started an apprenticeship with George Harwick, where he honed his knowledge of medical and surgical practices. From there, he continued to feed his inquisitive nature studying under John Hunter of St. George's Hospital in London. He made various contributions to the medical field and natural science, but it was the study of smallpox that gained him the most recognition. Over the years, Jenner had heard the dairymaid's statement reiterated, always the same, that after suffering from cowpox, dairymaids were immune to smallpox. Jenner surmised that cowpox may be able to be transmitted to another person as a method of intentional protection. In May of 1796, Jenner collected matter from an infected dairymaid's legion to inoculate an 8-year-old boy. Shortly after, the child developed a mild fever and discomfort, later losing his appetite. However, 10 days later, the boy felt fine. In July, Dr. Edward Jenner inoculated the same boy with matter from a fresh smallpox lesion. The boy never developed smallpox, and Jenner determined that the child was thus protected from the virus. For some years, his discovery was rejected, at which point Edward published a pamphlet regarding his findings. The Latin word for cow is vacca, and cowpox is vaccinia. Jenner decided to call this new procedure vaccination. The death rate from smallpox plunged due to his vaccination, and Jenner received worldwide recognition and many honors due to his discovery.
America's industrial past lends itself to ghost stories. No one can doubt that working in industrial mills was a dangerous enterprise. These mills employed whole families, including children starting at 6 years old. Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, covers 5 acres in the Blackstone River Valley and is credited with being the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution in America. There are 3 buildings on the property, and all of them are reputedly haunted. The Blackstone Valley has several haunted locations, and will also explore Tavern on Main. Join us for the history and hauntings of Old Slater Mill and Tavern on Main.
The Blackstone River Valley of Rhode Island was formed over millions of years through volcanic and glacial activity. Paleo-indigenous people were the first to live on the land starting around 12,000 years ago. The valley is named for William Blackstone, who arrived in 1635. He helped to found Boston before moving on to Rhode Island. The corridor stretches from Providence, Rhode Island, to Worcester, Massachusetts, with the river serving as a floating highway. The Blackstone Canal would later facilitate the moving of goods and enable the area to thrive with mill activity.
Pawtucket is Algonquin for river fall or at the falls. The first European settler was Englishman Joseph Jenkins Jr.
Jinkies. Makes me think of Scooby-Doo.
Zoinks! Ruh-oh. He had immigrated to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1647 when he was 19 years old, following his father who had come over to America several years before. Joseph learned his father's trade of iron smelting. In the 1660s, Joseph moved to the colony of Rhode Island, and he eventually bought land on both sides of the Pawtucket River. He erected a sawmill in 1669. In 1671, he purchased land at Pawtucket Falls and built a forge and sawmill, and the village of Pawtucket sprang up from there. Joseph built a forge that was destroyed in 1676 during the King Philip's War. The forge was rebuilt, and Pawtucket drew many ironmongers, and the economy became very industrialized. Samuel Slater built his water-powered cotton mill in Pawtucket in 1793, the first successful one in North America.
Samuel Slater was born in Derbyshire, England in 1768 and became an apprentice for a local owner of a cotton mill when he was very young. His father had died, and he was indentured to work at the mill. Slater worked his way through the mill until he was the superintendent. At that position, he was able to study the inner workings of the mill. The man who had designed the mill machines was Richard Arkwright. Arkwright was a pioneer in using water power to drive machines. He developed the spinning frame, which was originally used to spin thread and yarn from wool and cotton. The same framework was used with water to make the water frame. Arkwright also developed a rotary carding machine that converted raw cotton to cotton lap before spinning.
This kind of technology launched the Industrial Revolution, and Britain was very protective of the information. British law forbade workers in the textile industry to share this information, especially with America, and these workers were not allowed to leave the country. That didn't stop Slater. Slater emigrated to the United States in 1789, with the details of Arkwright's machines in his head. He was only 25 years old at the time. Slater started over in New York City. The echoes of Slater the Trader, from the town where he grew up, probably made it across the pond, but it didn't matter to Slater. In 1789, he heard that a mill in Rhode Island owned by William Almy, Smith Brown, and Moses Brown had bought a 32-spindle frame based on Arkwright's pattern, and they were having trouble operating it. He offered his services, and in 1790, Slater was in Pawtucket signing a contract with Almy and Brown. Slater built new machinery and water frames, and in 1793, Slater and Brown opened their first factory in Pawtucket. All the workers were trained to be skilled mechanics by Slater.
The system he developed was called the Rhode Island system. This brought whole families into the factory. The first employees, get this, Kelly, The first people that would come into this big old factory were children, 7 to 12 years old.
Oh, my word.
So I think he had like a dozen of them, and that's all he had for employees for a while.
Wow.
And they loved having kids in these factories. I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with this because they have little hands. And so they could reach in and get their hands into places that adults can't, which also means you can get hurt quite easily. A new kind of family life was developed in the villages, with towns growing up around the factories. Basically an early form of company town. The company provided housing, stores, and schools. A unique culture sprang up in the Blackstone Valley as immigrants came in successive waves from Poland, Italy, Portugal, Latin America, Canada, and Ireland. A new textile mill was built in 1793 and became very profitable after Eli Whitney developed the cotton gin the following year. Samuel married Hannah Wilkinson in 1791, and the couple would have 10 children. 4 of those children died in infancy. Hannah herself died after the final child was born in 1812 from complications from childbirth. She actually was the first woman in America to be granted a patent, and this is because she invented 2-ply thread. Slater remarried to Esther Parkinson in 1817.
Back to the industrial side of things. By 1798, Slater was moving on from Rhode Island, forming a company with his father-in-law, Osiel Wilkinson, and opening up mills in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Slater and Company would become one of the leading manufacturing companies in the United States. Factory strikes would come in the 1820s, and this would continue a long struggle for rights for factory workers. Slater died at the age of 66 in 1835. He owned 13 mills at the time and was worth over $1 million, and President Andrew Jackson called Samuel Slater the father of American industry. His original mill in Pawtucket became part of the Blackstone River Valley National Historic Park. That site is the old Slater Mill National Historic Landmark. This Saturday, on May 11th, 2024, the landmark is holding a commemoration of the 1824 strike. 200 years ago, this would be America's first industrial workers' strike. And you just so happen to be researching this 200 years later.
A little bit of synchronicity.
As always.
This was suggested probably 5 years ago, and I pulled it out from the ether there. And as I was on the website, I was like, wait, what's this little thing here about something they have coming up this weekend or whatever? And I was like, oh, talk about timing.
Yep.
Regardless of where one stands on the benefit of unions today, they definitely had a necessary place in the 1800s. Working conditions were awful in many industrial factories. Winters offered freezing buildings that would be sweltering in the summer. Workers as young as 7 worked from dawn to dusk, some making as little as $1 a week. The cotton industry had just endured the panic of 1819 and the tariff of 1824, and mill owners were seeking ways to keep costs low while increasing production. In Pawtucket, the decision was made to add an extra hour to the workday and cut pay by 25%.
Oh, well, that just sounds like it's going to solve all their problems, at least for the bosses.
I'm sure the workers were just like, oh yeah, what a great idea. I mean, how about an hour more of work and a quarter of our pay cut? Sounds good to us.
Ridiculous.
And Kelly, it would be the women to take a stand. On May 26, 1824, 100 women walked out of the mills and refused to work. This forced the mills to shut down. Other textile workers joined them over the following week. They didn't just sit outside the mills. They went to the mill owners' homes and shouted about wanting their wages restored. On June 1st, an incendiary device was thrown into the Walcott's mill and a fire resulted. The owners had had enough and asked the strikers to send some of their number to negotiate. Unfortunately, no written record was made of the results, but workers were back in the mills by June 3rd. While very little is known about this moment in history, it revealed that laborers were not powerless. Unions would eventually take over doing the negotiating, which for a time was a huge step back, at least in our eyes, because women weren't allowed to join unions early on. So this first strike that gets it all going was started by women, but the unions come in and they're like, no, ladies can't join us.
Insane.
Yep. That just goes to show when you don't know the history, then you're not going to do things probably the right way because you learn from history. So what they would have learned is we want the women here in the unions because clearly they'll take matters into their own hands and get stuff done.
Absolutely. Slater's Mill is hard to miss. It is a large yellow building. The original building, built in 1793, was 6 windows wide and 2.5 stories tall. Through the years, it was expanded 6 times. Water power was used to spin cotton here until 1895. The Old Slater Mill Association was formed in 1921, and it saved the old Slater Mill from demolition. They restored the mill to its 1835 appearance, and over the next 100 years, the association expanded the site to include the 1810 Wilkinson Mill, the 1758 Sylvanus Brown House, Hodgson Rotary Park, and Slater Mill Park. In 2021, the Old Slater Mill National Historic Landmark was accepted by the U.S. government to formalize the Blackstone River Valley National Historic Park. And just this year, 2024, Slater Mill Park was acquired by Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency for use as a riverfront municipal park. The site is open seasonally for tourism.
Touring.
Yes, I say it's strange. Regardless of season, it is closed Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays.
I thought I would make sure to throw that in there since, when we went to Gettysburg, we had no idea that everything was closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And
Right.
That was the 2 days that we were there. So I'm like, if I would have known that, I would have done our schedule a little bit different.
Yeah.
So just know, if you're going to go there, don't ever pick Mondays, Tuesdays, or Wednesdays. You're not going to get inside a building. David Wilkinson was an inventor and machinist who basically became Samuel Slater's right-hand man. One of his best inventions was the screw cutting lathe, which standardized the cutting of screw thread. So just one type of screw could be used on everything when making machines. I think you probably appreciate that a little bit, Kelly.
Heck yeah.
But even now we
With
have
all
so
the
many
stuff I do.
different screws. It's like, and we even found when we were changing out our lights, what do you call them?
The
The carriage
carriage
lights
lights,
on the
yeah.
outside of the garage. And you're like, boy, somebody just,
Jerry-rigged it.
yeah. Like they weren't even the screws that probably came with the lights.
Yeah,
And-
one screw was not like the other.
No, one was really short and pointed at the end. The
And
other
it
was
was-
flat.
It was stripped and it was a mess. It was,
So you-
it was a hot mess.
So you can imagine back in the day here where they're making these machines, if you had all these different kinds of screws, it would have been that much harder. He also developed steam-powered machines for textile production so that a nearby water source wasn't necessary. And eventually he developed power looms. In 1810, Wilkinson Mill was the first mill in Rhode Island to have a steam engine as backup power, and the building was made from rubble stone to help prevent fires. This mill is much bigger than the Slater Mill. Pawtucket blacksmith Oziel Wilkinson, David's father, built the mill with the construction of machines taking place on the first floor and textile milling on the 2 upper floors. So it was basically a multi-purpose building. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors.
Sylvanus Brown was a skilled woodworker who made full-scale wooden models of patterns of Slater's machinery. He helped Slater to produce mechanized textile machinery, and he built water-powered mills. He lived in the Sylvanus Brown house, which was built in 1758, from 1784 to 1824. His wife Ruth would have woven cloth at home for the family's use, and even for sale before the power loom was invented. The interior still has a loom and spinning wheels from the early 1800s. The house itself looks like a little red barn. It was moved to this location in the 1960s from a location 2 miles away.
All of the buildings on the property are believed to be haunted. People have claimed to not only feel cold spots, but to be enveloped in them and get a tingling experience as though they are being hugged, usually at the height of a child. Child ghosts are the ones most often seen, and they are usually barefoot because the children worked barefoot.
Aw,
Sure, that was very safe. The apparition of Samuel Slater has been seen walking around his old mill. The ghost of a small boy and a shadow person are sometimes seen in the Wilkinson Mill. A small face is sometimes seen in a window at the Sylvanus Brown house. The giggling of a little girl has been heard audibly in the house.
paranormal investigator and author Joni Mahan ran the haunted New Harmony Ghost Walks in Indiana, and she shared her experiences at the Old Slater Mill on a blog post. In the Old Slater Mill, she, quote, detected several ghosts in the building. I felt them lingering at the edges of the room, casually watching us. It almost reminded me of going to the zoo, but in this instance, we were the captive occupants being observed, instead of the other way around. It made for an interesting experience. During our tour, one of the women asked if the little boy was still there. Apparently, she had took a tour years ago and saw a small boy run across the second floor. He appeared as real as a live boy. She didn't think much of it until she realized that there weren't any children on the tour. The staff searched for the elusive boy but never found him. Had she seen a ghost? It's highly probable. The disembodied voices of children have been heard time and time again at the mill.
Joni volunteered to try giving one of the child ghosts a hug, and she wrote, "At first I was focused on the people surrounding me, watching me foolishly hug the air, but as I relaxed, I began to feel something else. The air inside my arms grew cooler, and I began getting the sensation of pressure. I had my mouth open to tell them that I was indeed feeling something when someone put a K2 meter near me, which immediately began flashing." Joni wrote of the Sylvanus Brown house. "Being the smallest building on the property, it was also the most fascinating for my friends Sandy and me. We immediately felt the presence of several ghostly inhabitants. While we both felt there was a male and a female entity, Sandy also thought there was a female child in residence. Little did we know how accurate we were. Investigators over the years have determined that the property is haunted by a woman, a man, and a girl, reportedly named Becca."
Demonologist Keith Johnson and his brother Carl have led ghost hunts at the property for years. Keith told the Road Show that he was once climbing the stairs in the mill with heavy work boots on when he heard an audible female voice say, "Quiet." Carl would host seances in the mill, and they would get audible voices and things would move around. The brothers feel that there are both good and bad spirits on the property. They've had many interactions with children, and the water wheel is a hot spot. Sometimes boys were asked to get up on the wheels to get them moving, and there would be accidents, and there was definitely at least one death. Carl said that voices have interrupted their daytime tours with screams, giggles, or saying hello. The most amazing thing that Carl ever witnessed was a heavy metal spike being propelled by an invisible force from a blacksmith anvil across the room. Antique crutches also once flew out of a corner at a guest.
I watched several videos with Keith Johnson and his brother Carl, and I'm like, God, I really recognize these guys. And then I remembered, I believe they were on when Ghost Adventures went to the Conjuring House. They were on with them during that.
Gotcha.
And I guess since Keith is a demonologist, that's one of the reasons why they wanted him there, and all this stuff happened. And, you know, whatever you believe about the Conjuring House and stuff, I believe if there's a bunch of demonic activity going on there, it's because of what people have brought into it with that mindset and everything. I don't actually think there's that much demonic going on there, frankly, but they, I think, kind of helped perpetuate some of that.
I have the same thoughts on that.
Laura, who had suggested this location, shared the following personal experiences. "I grew up in Pawtucket, and my first job was an assistant summer day camp counselor at the old Slater Mill. One day I was in the upstairs in the yellow building, and there was a young girl, 7 or 8, who I thought should have been outside with the group. That day we were making a soup outside over the fire. Oh, what fun.
Yeah.
Teaching kids how to do that. So I went to investigate to be sure she wasn't playing with any of the old doll houses or toys that had been shelved in that building before being placed on display in the museum. I walked around a corner and toward the shelves that went straight down to the wall with no other exit. When I saw her by a dollhouse, I went to tell her she needed to be downstairs, and before I could speak, she wasn't there. I don't really have great words to explain it, but it happened, and I don't have an explanation. I also stayed on after the summer program to assist others who were moving everything from a card catalog system to Ascension files. I went in one afternoon, and by the stairs in the wheelhouse, I heard a short scream. I then listened again and heard running steps and a booming voice and a cry of a boy or a young man. It was not long before I just didn't feel comfortable there anymore. I had also been a young teen girl who didn't want to be bothered with such tedious work at the time. So I suppose it was a combination of both. But hey, use the ghost for an excuse if you need to, you know? The Blackstone River Valley has several other haunts, and another one is the Tavern on Main, which is located at 1157 Putnam Pike in Chachapoya. This could be the most haunted restaurant in Rhode Island. Chachapoya means where rivers meet. The Pequot and Nipmuc were the first indigenous people here. Settlers came, and eventually this would become a place for the fiercely independent who wanted freedom and supported the patriot cause during the American Revolution. The Dorr Rebellion took place in the town from 1841 to 1842. A small rural elite had control of the state government, and many residents felt disenfranchised. Only landowners were allowed to vote. Thomas Wilson Dorr led the rebellion, which established a parallel government and wrote a new constitution they called the People's Constitution. This changed election rules so that white men who lived in the state for at least a year could vote. Dorr had wanted to include black men, but he was overruled. These parallel state governments both held elections in 1824, and this led to two men being voted in as governor of Rhode Island, Thomas Dorr and Samuel Ward King. The People's Constitution beat out a new constitution written by the original state legislature, and King vowed to not allow that to stand and declared martial law because he knew the people would revolt. Most militiamen, however, supported Dorr because he got them voting rights. I mean, why wouldn't they? They're like, we're not landowners. We want to be able to have a say in the government.
Sure.
Unfortunately, Dorr's army lost when their cannon wouldn't fire and they retreated. Dorr fled to New York, but returned shortly thereafter with more armed support, and they gathered in Chachapoya. No fight ensued as Dorr knew he would be defeated, so he disbanded his forces. Dorr had lost the ultimate rebellion, but it forced the hand of the state legislature to make changes.
The Tavern on Main was originally a colonial home built in the 18th century. The interior had a large center fireplace with hand-hewn native chestnut and oak lumber for posts and beams as the main structure. The home was later converted into a stagecoach stop and inn opened in 1799 as Cyrus Cook Tavern. During Dorr's rebellion, it was known as Sprague's Tavern, named for the owner, Jedediah Sprague. As Dorr's forces were hightailing it out of the village, King's forces were coming, and they knew Sprague's Tavern had been a place harboring the rebels. So a couple bullets were fired through the door, and a man named Horace Bardeen was hit in the thigh. Sprague jumped outside to calm everything down and save his patrons, and so he invited the troops inside. And they helped themselves, much to his dismay.
Over many, many weeks. Kelly, how much did they help themselves to?
My oh my. They consumed 37 gallons of brandy, 29 gallons of West India rum, 34 flasks of liquor, dozens of bottles of old Madeira and sherry, 12 dozen bottles of champagne, 2 dozen bottles of cider, 820 bushels of oats, 17 tons of hay, 50 bushels of corn, 16 bushels of meal, and a quarter ton of straw were consumed. I'm guessing the
Animals.
horses ate the straw.
I mean, maybe if they were drunk enough, they'd be chewing on some
Although
straw.
they don't usually eat straw, they eat hay. But I guess they would if they had to. Jedediah Sprague was never paid for anything.
But he probably saved some lives.
His heart was in the right place.
Yes. Get them drunk and they'll leave us alone. Over the years, the tavern has seen many incarnations. The building was a forlorn apartment building for a while, and then a billiard parlor, followed by a pub, and then a restaurant named Stagecoach Tavern. There are claims that H.P. Lovecraft would stop in for a drink anytime he was in northern Rhode Island.
Oh, nice.
The Tavern on Main opened in 2006 under chef David Lumna and his wife Kristen, who lease it. The current owner is Elias Sleeman. The tavern was recently given a facelift in 2022 to make it look more historically accurate. Lumna wasn't a believer in ghosts until he started working at the Tavern on Main.
There are said to be at least 5 ghosts here. Jedediah Sprague seems to still be looking for repayment in the afterlife. I can't say as I blame him.
Yeah, I mean,
they cleaned him out.
They did. Where's my money?
Thomas Dorr might also be haunting the tavern, as this was kind of his last stand in the Dorr Rebellion. There is also a female ghost that for years was called Elizabeth until paranormal investigator and author Thomas DeAgostino captured a female voice on EVP saying, "My name is Alice."
Whoops.
Whoopsie-woo.
Stop calling me Elizabeth.
She has been seen sitting in the back booth. The ghost of a little boy likes to hang out near the ladies' room or near the oven. The final ghost seems to be attached to the king's chair.
And then, Kelly, I found this other really cool thing that is right in this area. Chestnut Hill Road takes travelers 2 miles from Chachapoya to Gloucester. And this is where the Dark Swamp is located, and legend claims that it is haunted by a creature called It.
Pennywise?
I was like, that's the only It I know.
Or Cousin It?
Yeah.
From the Addams Family?
Albert Hicks was one of the first people to claim he encountered the creature. He was actually a pirate looking for buried treasure at night with a group of men in the 1840s. They smelled the creature before they even saw it. They described it as having flaming eyes and clamshells for skin, and it made a hideous noise as it breathed fire. They threw down their shovels and ran. In 1896, a man named Neil Hopkins ran into the creature on a road, and he ran with the thing chasing him for a while. A couple people disappeared in the dark swamp, and this was blamed on the creature. In November of 1923, H.P. Lovecraft and his friend named Eddie got off the stagecoach in West Gloucester, had dinner, and then set out for the dark swamp in what Lovecraft wrote was, quote, a quest of the grotesque and the terrible search for dark swamp in southwestern Rhode Island, of which Eddie had heard sinister whispers amongst the rustics. They whisper that it is very remote and very strange, and that no one has ever been completely through it because of the treacherous and unfathomable potholes, and the ancient trees whose thick boles grow so closely together that passage is difficult and darkness omnipresent. Old-timers told Lovecraft many stories of seeing it. The story Color Out of Space is thought to have been inspired by Dark Swamp.
Are these two locations in Rhode Island's Blackstone River Valley harboring more than just history? Could there be spirits milling about? And what about the Dark Swamp? Was there a creature there called It? Are these places haunted?
That is for you to decide. Well, Kelly, sounds like a couple of great places to check out in Rhode Island. I would definitely love to see those old mills, especially since basically the Industrial Revolution in America, that's where it got started.
Yep, absolutely. I'd love to go there.
X marks the spot. Kelly, we encourage people to check out our website at historygoesbump.com. And if you'd like to send us some feedback, you can do that at historygoesbump@gmail.com. We got a message over on YouTube under Phantasmal Crime number 25, which was about Ursulines Avenue's murder block. This is from KJ Wolf Drums 2077. I live in 727.
Oh.
I was like, oh. So then I said, well, have you had anything happen while you're there? Yes, I haven't seen anything yet, but I feel a presence sometimes, like a woman running her hand down my back. Other people in the building have often seen a female ghost. I've only lived here for 3 months, so it's probably just a matter of time. So I was like, thanks for sharing that.
And make sure if you have more experiences to let us know.
And then Carly messaged us over on Facebook. Hey, y'all. So I was listening to one of the Haunted Cemeteries 26 episode, and I heard someone tell their story about the Stanley and staying in room 214. Well, I have a story from staying there that I thought y'all might get a kick out of, but didn't want to post it on the page just in case it wasn't kid-friendly. So I'll make sure, as I'm telling this, that I keep it so that it's family-friendly.
There you go.
Well, a few months back, my boyfriend and I decided to stay in the Lord Dunraven suite. We were trying to conceive and start our family. Well, Dunraven was, let's just say, had certain proclivities to watch things and do things. And this time was no different. While they were helping to get their family started, we both saw a face that looked like his portrait in the bathroom glass door. Some people never change, even in death. LOL. Hope you have a great day. She also added, I am now 10 weeks pregnant, so I guess it was worth it. So I congratulated her on the pregnancy, and I said, you should have charged if he was going to insist on watching. The fact you both saw this convinces us that something was going on there.
Bit of a voyeur there.
Yeah. She said, yeah, it was pretty crazy. Definitely made me laugh, though, because he's known to grope women, so he at least kept his hands to himself, and thank you for the congratulations.
Well, yes, that part, at least he kept his hands to himself. Ew.
And Kelly, we have recorded this a couple weeks after, but we wanted to thank our listeners who joined us in Cassadaga at Hotel Cassadaga for our live show on April 27th. We had a great time. It's so much fun to meet everybody face to face.
Yeah, absolutely. Love making new friends, and we had a great time.
And if you guys want to join us for another one of these, we're doing one on August 17th in St. Augustine. So it's a great place to come. There's so much to do there. Make a weekend out of it. There's a special rate at Beecher's Lodge,
which is where we're staying, and it is right on the beach. And that's also the location where we'll be having our live show.
Yeah. So come stay Friday and Saturday night and watch the show on Saturday night. And usually we get together and go to a restaurant before that, all that good stuff. So
yep. Hang out with y'all.
You can find out more information about that at the top of our Facebook Spooktacular Crew page. And there will also be a link over on Instagram in our bio. I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.
This episode is brought to you by our executive producers.
Have a spooky experience that occurred at an historic location? Want to give us feedback or have a suggestion for the show? Share it with us at historygoesbump@gmail.com.
offered his services, and in
1970. They jumped from 1790 to 1970. It's amazing.
over 100 years.
The Industrial Revolution started right
120
when I
years.
was born, pretty much.
Or 220 years. His wife Ruth would have woven woo woo.
And wascally wabbit.
Wow wow wubsy. Cartoon the boys used to watch when they were little.
That is
for you to decide.
yeah.
What the heck?
I don't know.
It's been a weekend.
Yep.